Hi, this is Brian Cygan, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of The Exercise Coach. The Exercise Coach is a cutting-edge personal training business that helps people get the results that matter most to them with no more than 20-minute workouts per week. We offer safe, effective, and science-backed workouts in small, clean, private exercise studios in locations across the nation. And today, I'm here with my guest, Dr. James Fisher. Dr. Fisher is an exercise scientist at Solent University in Southampton in the UK, and we're going to be talking about his research-based perspective on strength training today. Dr. Fisher, thanks so much for being here with me today. Welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian. It's great to be speaking to you.
You bet. Well, Dr. Fisher, I thought we could just start, rather than me trying to share your background. Could you just share with us, with our listeners, a little bit about your background, expertise, and your particular focus or passion in research, if you have one?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's probably worth clarifying that for a number of years, I was a personal trainer myself. So I've kind of got a practical investment in this. And I think that's true of a lot of researchers these days, certainly the younger ones that are trying to see this connection between the science and between the application of the data. My area of research has predominantly been sort of low back pain and low back strength. But we've also looked at kind of volume of training. We've looked at a sort of a minimal dose approach to resistance training, and looked at comparing heavy and light loads. And then more recently, we've looked at perceptual responses to resistance training. So under the construct of taking resistance exercise to momentary muscular failure, we've then looked at degree of effort and then how that might differ from degree of discomfort, particularly based on maybe loading patterns or time under load and so forth. And that's been a really big area over the last few years, so and continues to be. So
wow, wow, super interesting to me, and I'm excited to get a chance to talk about your findings today and your perspective based on research. And you would say, I think I've heard you call it before, your view on resistance training and ultimately what it is that you're trying to help us practitioners apply. I think you've called it evidence-based resistance training. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my first papers from sort of 2011. 2010, 2011 was titled Evidence-Based Resistance Training Recommendations. And the idea of that paper and everything since then really has been, how can we deliver kind of guidelines or recommendations to the masses, whether that's to trainers or trainees, about what research supports what practices, I guess. So I would certainly call it evidence-based resistance training. Yeah.
Great. That's really, at the Exercise Coach, our focus is really, as I said in the intro, we want to deliver exercise that's safe, that's maximally effective, that's as time efficient as possible, and that we really can say, this is backed by evidence, this is backed by science. And that's why I'm so interested in your perspective. So, just a little bit about the work that you've done on evidence-based resistance training, low back strengthening, et cetera. How much work have you done? How many publications have you been a part of? Any idea?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we tally them up, and this is, of course, giving credit to a number of other authors around the world. I've got colleagues over in Germany who do some great research who I'm fortunate to collaborate with, in the US, Matt Brisky over at Princeton, Wayne Westcott, people like that, Luke Carlson at Discover Strength, and a lot of other places. I think the number is just around tipped the 100 publications mark. So
wow,
where it's due to those colleagues. So
wow,
fortunate.
That's a pretty robust long-term effort that's creating this perspective that you're drawing from. So I think that's pretty cool for people to hear.
Yeah, and it's great because, as soon as you collect one set of data and analyze it and write up a paper, you get more questions from that piece of research that lead on to more and more research studies. And that's really the really exciting bit, that we're still really enthused and really motivated to continue that process.
That's great. Well, Dr. Fisher, why don't we just kind of take it from the top? when we look at evidence-based resistance training, what kind of health and fitness results can people pursue through effective resistance training?
Yeah, so I mean that's the key question really, and there's just an absolute mountain of evidence supporting health benefits from resistance training. If we go through individual studies, there's everything from reducing risk of colon cancer, reduction in low back pain, improved bone mineral density, blood pressure, improving insulin sensitivity in diabetics, and so forth. And then psychologically, there's sleep patterns, reduced anxiety and stress response, and so forth. And ultimately, all of these actually kind of combine for the sort of the statements of increased strength, or stronger people have a reduced risk of all-cause mortality. And in layman's terms, that means that the stronger you are, the harder it is to be killed
Wow.
by any cause.
Wow.
But more than that is we published in a paper a few years back, and I don't claim credit for this statement. I'm sure I read it somewhere beforehand, but we've said that the goal of most people doing resistance exercise is to have a biological age equal to or lower than their chronological age. So for example, Brian, I'm 41 years old, but every year I have a fresh influx of 18 or 19-year-old students. So I've constantly got that competition and that motivation to be young in body and be strong and be fit. And ultimately, isn't that what we all want? You know, there's no harm in living to 120 years old, but if you have the body of a 120-year-old, that's probably not much fun. But if you've got
Sure.
the body of a 60 or 70-year-old, then that's great.
Wow.
So my goal is to live longer, but to be able to function as if I was a lot younger.
That makes so much sense. And we see people really as a result of effective resistance training in their 60s and 70s that, I mean, they're performing workloads that I think that the average 25-year-old would find really, really challenging if they weren't trained in the same way. It seems that we're setting the clock back by decades for people in a lot of ways.
Literally decades. There's been some really nice studies that have shown that after even 6 months of resistance training, older males, I think it was in their late 60s, have shown sort of cellular characteristics, mitochondrial characteristics, similar to people in their 20s, to males in their 20s.
Wow.
And that's exactly it. It literally can reverse aging from that point of view.
Wow. Well, that's inspiring for sure.
Right.
Well, that's a great summary. So let's sort of, the next question I'd like to ask then is, you know, I'd like to start to dial things in a little bit to how exactly, my guess is that the research doesn't show that we can just sort of do whatever we want and say we've done strength training in any way and get these kinds of amazing transformative results. So I want to talk about, you know, really more specifically the how. What do people need to achieve in the workout to achieve this kind of response from the body? So what do we know? Is there a way for you to maybe even create a framework of the key principles or variables that we need to control, and in what way we need to control them to get results like this?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I think that we need to manage is that the muscle is under tension. We don't get anywhere by simply looking at the process of moving an external load. So I think, and that focuses largely on a degree of technique, maybe, or on a degree of control of the external resistance. One of the big problems I see when people when I go into a commercial gym is that people are focused on simply moving a load by any means they can. Whereas if they think about contracting a muscle, they're going to get a lot greater results because they're actually doing the metabolic work of contracting the muscle, but they're also stimulating adaptations in that muscle. Alongside that, or perhaps secondary to that, I think is intensity of effort. So a lot of people will go into the gym and they'll do a few reps, and when things get a little bit difficult, they'll put the weight back down again, and then they'll update Twitter and update Instagram and send a few messages, and, before you know it, 5 or 6 minutes have passed, and then they'll do another few reps that don't really mean much. And actually, I would say the evidence now supports that really it's the effort level that we take exercise to.
Okay.
And I know there's a big debate going on about whether we do need to reach complete muscular failure, the point where we simply can't do any more, or if we get close to that. But I think getting close is the key. And then maybe the closer we get to that point, maybe is dealing in the minutiae of benefits. But I think effort is key. And of course, that's one of the main reasons why people don't perform resistance training, because they fear the hard work, or they see a lot of complexity in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I appreciate what you're saying about, whether or not we need to go to absolute failure. It seems difficult to land on what exactly that would be, whether we're looking at mechanically, whether or not a weight stops moving, we can no longer lift it. Have we reached metabolic failure at that point, even though we see mechanical failure? I don't really think so. So we use this term whole effort. We talk about whole effort exercise at the Exercise Coach. And what we mean by that, I think, is in line with what you're saying, where we're basically trying to coach and guide people to a point of near maximal effort. And if we can get, it seems if we can get in that ballpark of failure, mechanical, metabolic failure, that we see that we ignite some really neat results.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, if we put effort on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being completely maximal and you're pressing against the weight that isn't moving anymore, we've used that definition in some of our literature. And we like to say without change to the speed of movement or the technique, because a lot of people will change the technique when the effort gets hard.
Sure.
To try and make it easier. And changing the technique can be worse than doing the exercise to begin with, because that might lead to injury. But actually, I think if you're an 8 or a 9 out of 10, you're probably getting, a large proportion of the results. It's when your exercise is a 4 or a 5 that people are probably not getting much in the way of results.
That makes sense. So the takeaway is intensity of effort really matters to trigger these results that we're looking for from exercise. And it seems there's a threshold level. It's not sort of just necessarily proportionate to effort. It seems there's a certain threshold. You're calling it like an 8 or 9, a near maximal effort, to really trigger the maximum response, or maybe even any response at all from the body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely think the threshold is the right term. I think that we have to tip a point where we get to that maximal level of recruitment, where we get to that point where we're telling our body, this stress is too much, you have to adapt. If we stay below that, then we're not flicking that switch, for want of a better term. And with all this in mind, and the reason intensity is so important is because if people are working at a lower intensity, then they tend to do more and more and more. And so volume then becomes a key factor, whether that's number of sets per exercise or number of exercises per workout, or even number of workouts per week. Actually, if we train to a high enough level of effort, then I think that volume becomes certainly a less significant factor. More than one set per exercise doesn't seem necessary. More than a handful of exercises per workout, and probably more than a couple of times a week. And all of this really can mean that we can get certainly the health benefits of this kind of workout in probably less than 30 minutes twice a week.
Wow.
There might be debate over, are we optimizing muscle hypertrophy?
Okay.
With that, if you did more, could you get more? And if we're looking at pro bodybuilders, does an extra set get you an extra few percent? Maybe so.
Okay.
But certainly their motivations are different, and
Totally. Yeah. So you said a couple things just for some of our listeners that aren't as technically familiar. Volume, you're calling that, when you say volume, that doesn't have to do with like the music in the studio or anything. That has to do with the total amount of the exercise you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And then hypertrophy would be the idea of the muscles growing larger.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, certainly our clients we find are people that want to look better, and they want to feel better. They want to feel great, have more energy, be stronger, be healthier, but they're really interested in gaining that as a result of making their muscles better, not necessarily a whole lot bigger. I mean, I think our clients want a firmer, more toned, more defined look. They certainly want to see that they've built muscle, but we've often said our goal is not to turn a bunch of baby boomers or busy professionals into bodybuilders. It's to help them make their life better through enhancing their muscles.
Right. And in fact, if you go back far enough in the resistance training literature, hypertrophy, or an increase in muscle size, was actually referred to as a noxious effect of resistance training, because it's not always desirable that people grow their muscle size. What they want is the functionality that having strength affords them, but
Wow.
not necessarily the muscle size. So I think that really we should look more at your day-to-day people rather than your pro bodybuilders, and certainly that's where my area of research has been focused.
Cool. So we've talked about intensity of effort, and we've talked about volume. So we've talked basically so far about how hard the strength training should be, how much of it we should do, and I've heard you say in terms of number of sets, it doesn't take multiple sets. One properly performed set can trigger a result for the muscles involved. Putting that together with as a handful of exercises allows us to do a whole body workout. In terms of frequency, or how often, you've said, I think really a couple times a week should be effective for these broad health benefits. Mm-hmm. And then we deliver a 20-minute workout. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you would say you believe that could be fully effective for these health benefits. So that's sort of so it's high effort, brief workouts, one set. I guess how many exercises maybe would be one thing. We've heard about level of effort. We've heard about how often. We've heard about how long the workout might need to be and how many sets one might need to perform, which is one properly performed set. What about how many exercises in a workout does someone need to do to get a whole body benefit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we published a paper back in 2017 called A Minimal Dose Approach to Resistance Training, subtitled The Prophylactic to Aging. And the idea of this was we reviewed a lot of the literature about all these health benefits and what was the sort of the minimum dose of training performed. And in the end, we actually recommended that an upper body pressing exercise, so e.g. a chest press or an overhead press, an upper body pulling exercise, such as a lat pull down or a seated row, and a lower body pressing exercise is probably sufficient to see some health adaptations and some strength and muscular adaptations.
Wow.
So really only 3 exercises. And in fact, in that paper, I even suggest that a chest press and a row are potentially more favorable than overhead movements because of a sort of potential for shoulder impingement going above the head. So anything that's in this line in shoulder flexion extension is probably better than add and abduction. So sorry for the technical terms there. So those 3 exercises are probably the minimum dose. And then we can build on that with other compound multi-joint movements or single joint movements beyond that, if there are specific areas that need work. So we might look at people with low back pain or a weak low back and say, let's put in a single joint low back extension or a neck extension or flexion, or a knee extension exercise for the quadriceps, or so forth. And we can start to then develop that personal element of, let's design this workout for this individual. But I think those 3 key multi-joint movements is the minimum dose. And I think right now, with everything that's going on with social distancing and kind of lockdown and closure of a lot of fitness facilities around the world, people can maintain or even still see positive adaptations by just doing those 3 movements. If they can do any kind of pulling or rowing exercise, push-ups or any kind of bench press or chest press exercise, and then a squat or a lunge or some other kind of lower body multi-joint movement, they can still see really positive benefits from doing so.
Sure. And the key, it seems then, would be, are they able to apply the right effort level to make those productive? But that's really, really interesting. So you said upper body, so like a chest press, a row, and then you said a lower body pressing movement. For our clients, we talk about a leg press. That would be a leg press movement that you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And I would even go so far as to say that I would favor a leg press over and above anything else, because I think the instability of a squat means that we train the skill element of a squat exercise. So I think that a leg press is probably more favorable because we don't need to train balance in that way or that coordination. We simply need to train the muscles to contract with a high degree of effort.
That's a great point. I love that. So it's safer, and it allows us to keep the focus on what really matters, which is the stimulus, which is about the time under load, the quality of that loading to reach that level of effort that's necessary to trigger a result, versus the average person worrying about balancing hundreds of pounds on their back. And am I going to fall? Am I going to tweak my back? Am I going to get into the range of motion that's actually going to load my muscles, versus just be a range of motion that's me just sort of bouncing weight on my skeleton?
Right. I think that's completely true of a squat exercise. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, an elite athlete could use a barbell and squat very effectively, very intensely. I think we could debate whether or not that would even necessarily be ideal for them compared to something else. But certainly for the average person pursuing, looking, feeling, and functioning better, that squat exercise is probably less than ideal for them from a safety standpoint.
Completely anecdotally, I worked with a strength coach a few years back, and he was telling me that he introduced the squat exercise to a training routine. And he was telling me how much stronger his athletes were getting when they were squatting, but how that their actual performance, they were rowers, how their performance in the boat hadn't changed. And I asked him if he'd continued to use the leg press exercise as well. And he said, yeah. And I said, are they getting stronger on the leg press? And he said, well, that's the funny thing. They're not getting any stronger on the leg press. And I had to say to him, well, they're just getting better at squatting. They're not getting stronger. They're just getting better at performing that exercise. And that's something we've got to be really careful of when we add an exercise that has a degree or a high degree of skill, of balance, of motor coordination. We almost want to eliminate as much of that as we can so that we can truly stimulate the muscle.
Wow. I'm just taking some notes here. This is, you're covering so much. You're covering a lot today. I don't know if people listening can appreciate that. I feel like you're taking about 30 or 40 years of scientific research and anecdotal experience of thousands of people around the world and sort of cramming this into these really, really rich, pregnant statements. But this is good. We're touching on a lot. So a few other things that I'm thinking of in terms of the how. What does it take to get these results? Maybe speak to. Well, first of all, I guess I'd say you talked about 3 exercises being effective, sort of the minimal effective approach. We generally at the Exercise Coach generally use roughly 8 exercises per workout. So how does that fit in? Do you feel like that's going to be in the ballpark of what would make sense for the average person?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when I say 3, I do genuinely mean a minimum effective dose of stimulating all the major muscles of the body. I think as you build beyond that, you can add, as many exercises as you see fit. 12, 15 exercises is not unrealistic if a client can cope with that kind of continued work and has the time to do that.
Sure.
But of course, as we add more volume to a workout, more exercises to a workout, we might then start to impact the frequency at which we can train.
Okay.
So if I go in the gym or if I do a workout on a Monday and I do 3 or 4 exercises, then I might be okay to train again Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay.
So even just a couple of days rest. Whereas if I train on a Monday and I do 12 or 15 exercises and I do everything from multi-joint, chest press, shoulder press, pec fly, knee extension, leg curl, leg press, calf raises, lateral raises, rear delt flies, and I add in and add in and add in, then I'm probably going to be pretty beat up for a few
You're
days.
making me tired.
Right. I probably wouldn't want to train again if I did that on a Monday until maybe Friday or Saturday. My body simply wouldn't be in a good state.
So you literally can't work out as often. And that you just said was close to even needing a week of recovery, close to it, before you could even apply another workout. So as you increase the amount of exercise in one workout, you spread out you lengthen the time needed to recover, so you can't work out even as often. And so maybe there's a trade-off. So we're trying to sort of control how much we do in a workout, how often we work out, to balance those things in a way that are delivering the optimal package, the optimal program for an individual to make the progress that they want to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And the studies, more recent studies by some colleagues of mine, have even shown that frequency is potentially less important than volume. So you could train 3 times a week and do a third of the volume, or if you cram it all into one workout, then you only need to train once a week.
Wow.
Well, this comes down to time, right? So personally, I don't have an hour and a half to 2 hours once a week to do a full workout, but if I can get 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a week, then that works for me.
Sure.
I also wonder if you try and do it all in one workout, if the quality of what you're doing starts to deteriorate as the workout goes on. So and certainly the effort level would have to deteriorate. The last exercise you do, you've got to question whether you're really bringing the full effort. So
yeah, that really resonates. That resonates with me. I've been in the industry for 20 years and have been applying principles that would be in line with those principles that you see, coming out of the evidence. And we've landed on sort of that 20-minute range and about 8 exercises, exactly because of what you just touched on. There's this inverse relationship we discovered between someone's ability to work hard and the length of the workout, the duration of the workout. And it seems that we're so good at prediction that when we say, okay, we're going to do a 40-minute workout and we're going to do 20 exercises, if we took it to an extreme for us, instantly people are predicting, in order for me to complete that, I need to manage and modulate my effort level. But then we've brought that effort level down under the threshold necessary to trigger the results we're looking for. So we ended up landing on 20 minutes, 8 exercises being about right for our clients to be able to make sure they can give whole effort for as long as they can, for as many exercises as they can, to make sure it's efficient, but it's totally effective as well.
Yeah. I think that sounds great.
Well, cool. Well, what about, so one of the variables we haven't talked about that's a pretty measurable variable is what we call time under load. And can you just share your perspective in general on time under load? How does that fit into what we're talking about in terms of these variables? Do we have to do like a 5-minute exercise set or a 10-second exercise set? I mean, what's your perspective on optimal time under load ranges?
Yeah, this is a really interesting area, actually, Brian. We've just published a paper, myself and some colleagues, where we challenge an existing paradigm, which is called the strength and endurance continuum.
Okay.
Just to clarify what that is, it's this kind of, it's what I would call the accepted wisdom in strength and conditioning, that if you lift a heavy, for maximal strength, you only have to lift a few repetitions, but use a very heavy load.
Okay.
To maximize muscle growth, you use a more moderate load and a more moderate number of repetitions, and therefore a slightly higher time under load.
Okay.
And for strength and for endurance adaptations, you use a lighter load for a higher number of repetitions for a longer time under load.
Okay.
Now, the paper we've just published and a lot of our research leading up to this has really challenged this and said, actually, it doesn't really matter if you use a very heavy load or a very light load. You're still going to improve your strength to a similar degree. You're still going to improve your muscular hypertrophy or your muscle size to a similar degree. And your endurance, your muscular endurance is probably more aligned to your strength anyway. So if your strength improves, your muscular endurance improves as well. So, so we've kind of really challenged this over a few years. And the key with all of this, I would say, is as long as you're working to that high degree of effort. So you can use a light load if that's all you have, but you need to get to that high degree of effort. Now, if you use a very light load and to get to a high degree of effort, you're going to have a longer time under load. So you're going to be under tension for maybe, like you said, your example was 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not very nice to be under muscular tension for.
Sure.
But the key is we don't need to go super heavy either. We don't need to do like single maximal effort repetitions. We can kind of work somewhere in between. Now, historically, the research has suggested somewhere around 60 to 90 seconds. But I would even come a little bit lower than that and say,
Wow.
Once you're crossing probably that 40, 45 second mark, you've probably maximized recruitment, motor unit and muscle fiber recruitment.
Okay.
As long as you're at that high effort, and therefore there's no need to kind of keep going with this. I think a lot of it might depend on the way the loading is applied. So if you did, so I know, for example, that you guys use isokinetics.
Mm-hmm.
So the initial repetitions I know are not maximal, but they could be maximal from the offset.
Sure.
And with that in mind, I wouldn't suggest going for a long time. I think 90 seconds of maximal effort is probably way more than is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the idea of beginning with some movements that are submaximal and trying to then build it up to a higher effort level, which is more akin to traditional style training, then anywhere around the 45 to 90 second mark, based on kind of personal preference and maybe the exercise being performed. Some people might do well with lower body exercises for a longer time under load,
Okay.
or shorter, and vice versa for upper body muscles.
Okay.
So, but
Wow.
the key factor within this as well, which I just touched on, and I'll elaborate on if that's okay,
Yeah.
is the perceptual response. So one of the key things that we've found in our most recent research is that a longer time under load leads to a far more negative perception of that exercise. So when I say perception, I mean discomfort.
Okay.
When our participants are asked to differentiate between the amount of effort they're applying and the amount of discomfort or pain they feel, they can give maximal effort, but they don't want the maximal pain in return. Well, if you do a single maximal contraction, then it's an effort of 10, but it's very, very low on discomfort.
Okay.
Whereas if I now asked you to do 50 more of them, well, your effort doesn't change. It's still maximal, but trust me, your discomfort starts to go up and up and up. So
Sure.
the longer time under load is definitely associated with higher degrees of discomfort and negative perceptual responses. So.
And that's got to have, I would think that just if we looked across a population, a broad population, you've got to think that is going to have an impact on compliance. That's going to have an impact on motivation. I know in my own personal experience, it does. As I play with these variables for myself and try to find what's optimal, it certainly factors in that, performing a long set can just become so grueling that I'm going to back away a little bit from effort before I might reach maximal effort. So this is, I think, a really, really, it's not an area that like when I was in school, we talked about, or even over the last 20 years, I don't feel like it's an area that that people who really look at the science of resistance training have looked much at. But it seems like sort of the next frontier. How do we, in order to really optimize strength training, we even have to look at the individual, you're calling it the perceptual response, which is the comfort or discomfort of the exercise and the impact on motivation and continuation of the solution that we're providing.
Absolutely. And to put that in a practical context, I mean, if we think about what our recommendations have been for older adults, we've always said, well, let's use a lighter weight. And our problem is that they then manage that lightweight, so they do more reps or more sets or a higher volume in some form, but they potentially stimulate a greater degree of muscle soreness, a slower rate of recovery. So we talked about a number of days between workouts. We had a study where we compared not just the response to the trained limb, but a response to an untrained limb. So I had some of my, most research in a university environment is with male collegiate participants. So, 18 to 25. And I had a number of them perform single leg knee extension exercise with a heavy load or a light load on different days. And then for the next 3 days, I had them come back in and I tested their strength. But I tested them on both the leg that they had exercised and the untrained leg. So the non-exercised leg. And after the lighter load exercise, both the leg that had done the exercise and the untrained limb showed high degrees of fatigue for up to 72 hours afterwards.
Wow.
So we take our older adults and we say, let's give them the pink dumbbells, right? We give them a really lightweight, get them to do a bunch of reps, a bunch of sets, and then send them off home knowing that they did a great workout. And then they're sore for days. Their function has really deteriorated from this exercise. They had a lot of pain or discomfort from the workout itself. And then we question why they don't want to come back and do it again.
Wow. Sure. That's a great point.
And the same really with endurance athletes. We take our triathletes and we give them a light weight and we tell them, yeah, keep going for 5 minutes with this. And it's not good advice. It's really not good advice. We should be working with a far more moderate load to enhance strength, muscle mass, and muscular endurance and functionality around that.
Wow.
As well as, and this is one of the only other caveats around this, as well as bone mineral density. So bone mineral density is a key variable, especially in females and in older adults. And we know that bone mineral density only really improves either with impact or with relatively heavy loads. Okay. So if we give people a very, very light weight, then we run the risk that they're simply not stressing. They're not putting enough stress through the skeletal system to improve the bone mineral density. And this is my big issue with things like aqua aerobics. Aqua aerobics is great for the older adult, for the social element and the fun element, all those good things. But to improve bone mineral density, this is like the worst thing that can be done because we're reducing their body weight. We're not increasing the stress on their skeletal system. So I think more moderate loads are almost essential for that variable as well. So
wow. Well, it sounds like there are a lot of things out there that are a little bit upside down when we look at the evidence in fitness, that are really kind of upside down. And everything that you're saying here, I mean, you would say, I mean, it's supported by or flowing from, it's sort of a fully orbed framework that you have for thinking about how we exercise optimally, that's based on, you've said, more than 100 studies that you've participated in. So you're not, these aren't based on your opinion or your preferences. You're kind of just going where hundreds of studies have led you. Is that right?
Brian, it's more than just my research. There's a ton of other great research that have led to this. Rod Schoenfeld and Stu Phillips and Wayne Westcott, Mark Polsky. There are just a ton of great exercise scientists in the world who have shown a lot of this data. So it's really not just me. From that sense, I'm fortunate to have some great colleagues out there. So
yeah, thanks for that. Well, man, this has been a lot today, Dr. Fisher. I still have 3 or 4 questions I'd love to get to if we have time. I want to respect your time, but
no, let's do it. Let's go.
okay. I've got sort of, I've honed it down to just a few more that I really want to make sure we touch on. And then, man, I've got some as well. I think we're going to need to set up another time. I'd love to really talk more about the back, the spine, the lower back in another call.
Of course.
But for today, let's see. So what about supervision? Is there anything in the literature that gives us any idea of the value of supervision or the necessity of supervision or any insight about supervision as it relates to strength training?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's certainly not a large volume of research around this area, but there are a number of studies, and they've all really shown the same thing, and that's that supervision enhances results. So and that's going from non-supervised to supervised, or even large group supervised. So it was a coach to, I think, 25 athletes compared to a coach supervising a smaller group of 5 athletes. And again, it's repeatedly shown that supervision, the better the supervision ratio, the better the results. And a lot of that really lends itself back to the effort level, that people either increase the weight that they're using and they progress more, or they simply work harder because of the motivation and encouragement by the coach. Now, something that hasn't been reported, but I would say is also a key factor in this, is exercise technique. So the students that I work with learning about personal training, one of the key factors is that they promote and reinforce good technique, which of course serves to keep the correct muscles under tension, but also prevents injury from the other muscles. I mentioned about going to a commercial gym before, and one of the big problems that I see is people reporting getting injured. And when they say they got hurt in the gym, I often ask the question, what's an acceptable injury risk in a strength facility? Well, the answer is 0. People are going there to enhance the quality of their life, not to negatively impact it by getting injured. So if they're doing something that's causing an injury, there has to be a question mark over either what they're doing or the technique they're using to do it. And I think that's where supervision comes in. Even if it's simple things like, I did a press exercise and felt this pain in my neck. Well, what were you doing wrong? And I think that's where we can avoid anything like that with supervision. So I think it's a key factor. I think that most colleagues I know would work with a training partner or work in a supervised environment where possible. So.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay, so that's supervision. So I've got maybe just 2 more. So
sure.
Maybe two more. I'll leave maybe the toughest one for last. But first, what about, and I'll just say at the outset with this question, I've got a little bit of perspective on this, but I think there's going to be some intersection between our perspectives. I think there's going to be some overlap. And in fact, I think that because part of my perspective is really, I think, influenced by some of your work looking at lower back strengthening. So the question is around range of motion and how much range of motion is necessary, and what really, I've got some thoughts on whether or not there is such thing as full range of motion as it relates to a muscle in strength training. But you've done some research, I think, and it's your research, so make sure I get it right. But it seems to indicate that we could do what you've called limited range of motion exercise and gain fuller range of motion benefits. Is this the case?
Yeah, Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence that supports this, and I'm not going to say that it's the same for every muscle and every joint, for every movement and every exercise.
Okay.
And certainly, it might not be the same for things like muscle growth.
Okay.
I think certainly for muscle strength, we can certainly shave the end off each end of range of motion and still see strength increases at those extremes. So, and this is really interesting, but the question would be, why would we look to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if somebody is likely to get injured performing an exercise, they're probably most likely to get injured at the extreme range of motion, at one extreme end of an exercise. So if, for example, I take a pec fly or a chest press exercise, then when my shoulder is abducted or extended as far as possible, that's going to be the point where it's going to get injured. It's not going to get injured here at midpoint. So if we take it to a point where it maybe comes to parallel to our body, then do we still get the same adaptations? And I think that that's a really good question around exercise technique. I know Bill DeSimone has looked a lot at this area and exercise biomechanics. And I think that the key thing with all of this is that we are looking down the line, we're looking at longevity. So there are some studies that show that a limited range of motion can improve strength throughout the full range of motion, throughout. And they're good studies to sort of lean on for this. Other academics might challenge that, and I think they might have a fair argument. But I think that the key point around this is, if we choose to limit range of motion, there might be greater longevity in performing that exercise. We might be taking just enough stress off a joint to allow us to continue doing that movement for 30, 40, 50 years.
Great.
And the reality is that with most exercises, if we are going to get injured, it's not an acute injury. It's not something that I do today that gets me injured. It's the constant wear and tear of doing that same thing over and over again. And that's where exercise technique is so important. People might say, well, I do this technique and I've never got injured doing it. And I look at them and, my students say that to me a lot. And I say, you know what, you're 20 years old.
You're 18.
You can do, you can do anything. You can do anything and not get injured. But trust me, when you get to 40 or you get to 50 or you get to 60, you're going to wish you'd done it slightly differently for every one of those workouts twice a week for the last 20 or 30 years.
What a great point. Because it would take
a bit less strain on the knee or a bit less strain on the elbow or the shoulder or the neck. And so longevity becomes really important. And especially when we think about, I'm going to say a more mature client base, an adult client base, rather than our young 18 to 25-year-olds. I think when we look at an adult client base, we don't need to push the same extreme ranges of motion. It's just not necessary.
Yeah, it's probably necessary not to. Like you're saying.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Super helpful. Well, and by the way, James, you're still coming in loud and clear. There might have been a little bit of lag visually. I don't know if you noticed that, but I'm hearing you perfectly. So don't be distracted by that if you do notice that. You're coming in loud and clear. So, all right. So this has been great. I really appreciate it. I've got one more question, and then I'm just going to give you a chance to sort of maybe sum it all up and give our listeners kind of a call to action, what you would suggest that they sort of really become motivated to do or keep doing. But before that, just one last question. This might be the hard one, but I think you're up to it. And it's in this area of sometimes this is the way it's posed to me. What about cardio? There's so much emphasis on strength and on muscle. What about cardio? Are there actually cardiovascular benefits to strength training?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And this is another area of research that we've had ongoing for a while.
I feel like, James, I feel like you're looking at me saying, Brian, you just asked a question that I would love to have an hour to answer. But so I'm sorry about that.
I would, and I'm going
Well,
to
we could do it again.
down.
We'll do that. We could do a cardio interview sometime. But so sorry about that. But if you could just try to give us at least a summary response, man, it'd be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the first thing I would say is if somebody is not currently performing any exercise, then the best thing they can do is strength training, and they will get an improvement in their cardiorespiratory adaptations. There's no question about it. There was a big review that was published a few years back that showed that what they called resistance circuit training, they called it. And basically they referred to it as resistance training, where you move between exercises relatively quickly, and where the resistance was taken to a high degree of effort. So it aligns quite nicely with high intensity training. It's in my head, I perceive that to be kind of high intensity training. And they showed an improvement of about 10% of their cardiorespiratory performance from, a matter of weeks of exercise. So certainly there are definitely adaptations to the cardiorespiratory system. Ultimately, all this is about moving oxygen around the body, but some of the intricacies of that is how efficiently we do that. And strength training can stimulate those adaptations. So that's the key part of this. If somebody is already what I would term a cardio athlete, a cyclist, a runner, a triathlete, so forth, they might not see big improvements in their performance by adding strength training, but they shouldn't see any detrimental effects. And as a cyclist, the key thing I would say is that cyclists should do more strength training because they don't get any impact or any weight-bearing exercise any other way. A runner does have that impact, so they may improve their bone mineral density through that, but a cyclist doesn't. So I think that strength training is for all, whether it's looking to improve your cardiovascular benefits or whether you're looking to supplement other exercise with strength training. Now, this flies against a little bit the idea that you have to do cardio to improve your cardio benefits and you have to do strength training to get stronger. We've published a number of papers kind of challenging that concept. And ultimately what we came back with is that, again, it comes down to effort. If you work hard, then you will stimulate adaptations, whether they're cardiorespiratory or muscular. If you work to a low effort level but do a higher volume, you probably don't get the same positive adaptations. And we found with strength training that we see similar acute and chronic, so short-term, immediate, and long-term adaptations as you would do with cycling in between a leg press exercise and a recumbent bike with the exact modalities that we use.
Wow.
So yeah.
So it's almost like that's not wow. So it's not that. So wow. So the bike isn't a cardio tool, and the leg press isn't just a strength tool. They're tools that allow us to use our muscles how we choose according to some protocol to achieve a level of effort that can deliver strength and cardiovascular adaptations in the short term and the long term, I think is what you just said.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a guy, I think he's Finnish, a colleague called Tommy Lundberg, who's published some great studies showing that sprint cycling can improve strength and hypertrophy to a similar degree to just strength training alone. So we can show that even cycling can when it's taken to that high degree of effort, that maximal all-out effort, can stimulate similar adaptations to what we would normally expect from lifting weights.
Sure.
And anecdotally, if we look at the Olympic Games and you look at sprint cyclists, they have pretty big quads.
Sure.
Now I know that they go in the gym and they lift weights as well, but certainly they definitely have some positive adaptation by their short-term, high-effort cycling. And this is where I say modality modality almost doesn't matter.
Mhm.
As long as we're at that high degree of effort. Now, the thing around that is that cycling or running or anything like that might have other potentially negative impacts based on the modality that you're performing, where strength training, in my opinion, doesn't have those negatives around it. So somebody might say, well, that's great, I can go off and do sprinting instead. And I would say, hey, watch out for your knees. So
exactly. Yeah. What's the trade-off? And we're trying to find the sweet spot of, again, like we started at the top. Optimal means it is safe as possible immediately, but also it makes it sustainable. You talked about longevity, safe, maximum results, minimum time. And that's why many of us have landed on the modality of strength training.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm gonna use that to transition into. You said that I could kind of give a bit of a summary at the end.
You bet.
So I'm going to transition
Please
into
do.
that, and I'm going to say one of the key things about strength training is its lifestyle. It's not a diet that you pick up and put down for 12 weeks. It needs to. It's easy to ingrain into your life and become a habit in the same way we brush our teeth. I don't know anybody who brushes their teeth because they just love to brush their teeth. They do it because they want to keep their teeth and they want their teeth to function. Well, strength training is the same thing, but think of it now as our whole body. We don't do it because we love to lift weights or go to the gym or anything. And we might do. Some motivations might be around the social element or the affiliation element. There's definitely a factor in that. But I think as we get older, we realize, as we become more aware of our own mortality, we look at strength training and exercise as, as a weight loss method, as an ill health avoidance. That's one of my main motivations. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get injured. I want to stay fit and strong and healthy and function. And strength training helps me do that. And I think once we look at it from that perspective, twice a week for, like I said, the example I gave was 30 minutes and you said 20 minutes, Brian, but we're on the same kind of page with this. It just becomes a lifestyle. It just becomes something that we kind of make time for, because we know all these other benefits that we're going to reap from it, not just today or tomorrow, but in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years time.
Yep. Wow. Well, I'm motivated. Thanks, Dr. Fisher. I'm motivated to go get my workout in. So I think you've hit the target here today. Well, thank you so much. We covered a lot. I feel like I kind of peppered you with a lot, and you really were able to sort of cram a lot of really good meaty responses in. So super helpful for us. Thank you so much for your willingness to do this. I'd really love to set up time to maybe we could spend more time talking about cardiovascular or weight loss. I'd love to talk about low back health as well, because we do some pretty unique things in that area that have even been impacted by some of your research. So I'd really love to have that conversation at some point. So I'd love to have you back in the future if you were willing.
Absolutely, Brian. Yeah, let's set something up.
Sounds good. Well, you enjoy strength and be well. Stay well, Dr. Fisher, and we will talk to you soon.
You too. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.